On January 21st, 2025, Sam Altman stood in the White House one day into a new presidency and helped announce the biggest single breath blown into the AI bubble yet. $500 billion for infrastructure alone. Cameras, handshakes, a president calling it exactly that, a monument to the future. That same night, at 1 in the morning, the richest man on the planet looked at all of it and posted 5 words. They don't actually have the money. Everyone moved on. The two of them have history after all, but 18 months later, a confidential filing leaked. And buried in the fine print was a number that made those 5 words sound less like jealousy and more like a warning. So, was he right? To answer that, we have to go back to a dinner in 2015. In the summer of 2015, a handful of people sat down for dinner in California. Elon Musk was there. So was a 29-year-old named Sam Altman. The topic on the table was simple and slightly insane. Google had just bought DeepMind, the leading AI lab on Earth, and everyone at that table was terrified of what happens when one company owns the smartest machine ever built. Their fix was to build a rival, but instead of a company, they created a non-profit, a research lab called OpenAI, founded that December with $1 billion pledged to build artificial intelligence for the benefit of humanity as a whole, unconstrained by a need to generate financial return. Say that phrase back to yourself. Unconstrained by a need to generate financial return. That's the kind of line you write when you believe you'll never need the money badly enough to break it. Altman believed it enough, apparently, to say something even bigger a few months later at a conference with a microphone pointed straight at him. AI will probably, like most likely, lead to the end of the world, but in the meantime, there'll be great companies created. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't joking. That's the founder of the company on the record in 2015, telling you the ending before the movie even started. Hold on to that line. He's going to say versions of it again, and every single time, the people around him will respond the exact same way, with more money. But first, the pledge had to actually show up, and mostly it didn't. By 2021, the nonprofit had collected around $130 million, a fraction of the billion promised. Elon Musk, who liked to say he'd personally put in close to $1 billion, had, by OpenAI's own count, contributed less than $45 million, because Musk wanted more than a seat at the table. In 2017, he pushed to take the company for profit, with himself in charge, or better yet, folded straight into Tesla. OpenAI said no. You don't hand one person the wheel on something built specifically, so no one person could ever hold it. So in February of 2018, Musk walked, calling OpenAI on a path of certain failure. His money stopped with him, which left OpenAI exactly where a charity with a very expensive hobby tends to end up. Broke, with a compute bill the size of a small country's GDP and the world's smartest machine still years from paying for itself. This is the part of the story where you'd expect the charity to shrink. Instead, in March of 2019, it did something much stranger. It invented a new kind of company, a capped profit. Investors could make up to 100 times their money, and after that, every dollar flows back to the nonprofit for humanity. On paper, a safety valve. In practice, a cap so high that nobody in the history of venture capital has ever come close to hitting it, which makes it less of a limit and more of a decoration. 4 months later, Microsoft walked through the door with $1 billion, most of it not even cash, mostly cloud computing credit, in exchange for exclusive rights to the technology this so-called open company was building. That's the moment the fuel went into the tank. A rocket built by idealists, funded, from this point forward, by a corporation that answers to shareholders. And here's the pattern worth holding on to, because it repeats for the next decade. Every single time OpenAI's mission collided with OpenAI's bills, the mission lost. And every single time, Sam Altman announced it himself, calmly, in public, before anyone had to drag it out of him. He always tells you first. That's the strange part. Nobody's ever really listening. So what do you do with a charity that just built itself a rocket and handed the fuel line to somebody else? By 2020, the rocket was already leaving the ground, and almost nobody could see it happen. That June, OpenAI released GPT-3, a language model so far ahead of anything public that Microsoft didn't just want to use it, it wanted the exit locked. Microsoft got an exclusive license to the actual technology. Nobody else got a copy. People started calling the company something else after that, not OpenAI, Closed AI. The joke wrote itself, and it was accurate. The engines were already lit. The public just couldn't hear them yet. Then, on November 30th, 2022, everyone heard them. OpenAI released a chat interface built on that same technology and called it ChatGPT. It hit 100 million users in 2 months. Nothing in the history of consumer technology, not the iPhone, not Instagram, not TikTok, had ever climbed that fast. 2 months later, in January of 2023, Microsoft came back with the real money, close to $10 billion this time, bringing its total investment to around $13 billion. In return, Microsoft locked in 75% of OpenAI's profits until it got paid back, a share of everything after that, and Azure as the only cloud provider allowed to run any of it. Every message you've ever typed into ChatGPT has been billed straight through Microsoft. The valuation numbers started moving the way altitude does on a rocket that stopped worrying about gravity. $29 billion by April of 2023, $86 billion by the start of 2024, less than a year later. Employees who joined a charity were suddenly sitting on paper fortunes if the company ever let them cash out. And somewhere in that same stretch, Sam Altman said something in public that, looking back, sounds less like reassurance and more like a countdown. No one person should be trusted here. The board can fire me. That's important. There it is again. He tells you first. This time, he told you exactly what could stop him months before anyone actually tried. Because up in that boardroom sat 4 people who technically still had their hands on the only kill switch this company had left. They were about to find out whether it actually worked. On November 17th, 2023, they pulled it. 4 board members, including his own co-founder and chief scientist, fired Sam Altman. The official reason? He hadn't been consistently candid in his communications with the board. No further detail. The board wouldn't even tell their own executives what exactly he'd done. Normally, that's the end of the story. A company fires its CEO. The story runs for a day. Everyone moves on. Except OpenAI had a problem the board didn't account for. Days before the firing, employees were lined up to sell their own shares at that $86 billion valuation. Some of them had already put deposits down on houses with that money. And now the deal was frozen and nobody would say why. So they didn't accept it. Within 48 hours, 740 of OpenAI's roughly 770 employees signed a letter threatening to quit unless Altman came back. Even Ilya Sutskever, the man who just voted to fire him, signed it too. Microsoft offered to hire the entire company on the spot if the board didn't fold. The board folded. On November 21st, 4 days after the firing, Altman was back in the building. The people who'd built the one mechanism designed to stop him if he ever went too far had used it exactly once, and it lasted less time than a long weekend. The break didn't fail because it was weak. It failed because the moment it mattered, the money already had a bigger vote than the mission. Over the next year, the people who'd actually tried to slow this thing down started leaving anyway. Ilya Sutskever was gone by May of 2024. Days later, Jan Leike, the man who'd run OpenAI's safety team, resigned and said it outright. Safety culture and processes have taken a back seat to shiny products. For a while, almost nobody who left explained why, in any detail. Then, it came out that departing employees had been asked to sign away their right to ever criticize the company, or lose every share they'd already earned. Altman said publicly he didn't know the clause existed. OpenAI walked it back within a week, but for a while, that's how quiet this company managed to keep its own people. The exits kept coming. Mira Murati, the CTO, gone that September, and Helen Toner, one of the board members who'd voted to fire him, came out later and said Altman had been outright lying to the board for years. including at one point letting them find out ChatGPT had launched the same way everyone else did, from Twitter. By the time the dust settled, 9 of OpenAI's original 11 co-founders were gone. The one mechanism built to put humanity above the company got tested once and lost. From this point forward, there's nobody left upstairs to pull anything. Watch what it does next, with no one holding the switch. You already know how that White House moment ended. 5 words at 1 in the morning. They don't actually have the money. What you didn't see is what happened in the months on either side of it. In October of 2024, 3 months before Altman ever stood next to a president, OpenAI closed a funding round that valued the company at $157 billion. Then came Stargate. Then, in February of 2025, Elon Musk tried to buy the entire nonprofit out from under him for $97.4 billion. OpenAI's answer was 3 words: no, thank you. The lawsuit Musk had already filed just kept grinding forward in the background. One more bill nobody was paying yet. And then the real spending started. Over the following year, OpenAI signed deal after deal. Oracle for roughly $300 billion in computing power. NVIDIA, an investment letter worth up to $100 billion. AMD, Broadcom, Amazon for another $38 billion. By the time Altman finally put a number on all of it publicly, the total came to $1.4 trillion. That's the number in this video's title. That's the promise. Now here's the part almost nobody draws out loud: how this bubble actually stays inflated. Follow the money in a circle and watch what happens. NVIDIA invests billions into OpenAI. OpenAI turns around and spends billions buying NVIDIA's chips. Amazon invests billions into OpenAI. OpenAI turns around and spends billions renting Amazon servers. And Microsoft, the company that's supposed to be OpenAI's partner, collected $17.2 billion from it in a single year, while OpenAI builds a product designed to replace Microsoft's own software. The investor is the customer is the landlord, and now the landlord is turning into the competitor. Everybody's got their lips on the same balloon, and they're calling it a partnership. And look, there's a whole separate story in that one arrow pointing back at NVIDIA, the arms dealer selling shovels to every side of this gold rush at once. That one's next. So if you like what I'm doing here, go ahead and subscribe. Okay, back to the bill. Because in June, that bill finally leaked. Actual audited numbers, not projections. In 2025, OpenAI made $13 billion. It spent $34 billion getting there. Strip out the one-time accounting charge from turning the company for profit, and the real number, the cash that actually left the building running the business, comes to about $21 billion. Add the accounting charge back in, and the headline losses hit $38.5 billion for the year. Remember what Sam Altman said back in 2024. Whether we burn $500 million a year, or $5 billion, or $50 billion a year, I don't care. And somehow, through all of it, the thing still works in the ways that matter to the people paying for it. When OpenAI let users turn photos into Studio Ghibli-style art, Altman said they added 1 million new users in a single hour. Its models have won gold at the International Math Olympiad and gone 12 for 12 at the world's toughest coding contest, better than the best human teams alive. This is not a company that's bad at building things. It's a company that's extremely good at building things it can't afford. None of that comes free either. Behind every one of those numbers are workers in Kenya, paid a few dollars a day, filtering the worst material on the internet out of this thing's training data, so the rest of us never have to see it. So yes, the model is brilliant. And yes, the man running it keeps getting caught doing exactly what he told you he'd do. He tweeted a single word, her, days after an actress said he'd asked to use her voice. She said no, twice, and OpenAI used a voice that sounded exactly like hers anyway. He announces the plan, then does the plan, every single time. By the start of 2026, OpenAI closed the largest funding round in history. $122 billion at a valuation of $852 billion. NVIDIA put in $30 billion of it. Amazon put in $50 billion, some of the same names standing on both sides of the circle again. Which brings us to the actual promise. $1.4 trillion signed and announced, against a company that by its own numbers brings in about $13 billion a year. Somebody was going to have to explain that gap eventually, and in the summer of 2026, somebody finally tried to. In June of 2026, OpenAI filed confidentially to go public. Buried in the fine print of that filing was the number that turned Elon Musk's late-night post from a rumor into a receipt: $665 billion. That's not the full $1.4 trillion from a moment ago. It's the portion OpenAI has actually signed contracts for, chips and power and data centers through 2030. Sitting right next to that number on the same balance sheet is this: officially zero debt. Technically true. A signed commitment to pay isn't legally the same thing as a loan. And in that same filing, the company reported about $73 billion in cash on hand. Do that math yourself. $73 billion in the bank. $665 billion signed away. And another $1.4 trillion in total promises hanging over all of it, which might explain why OpenAI wanted to go public in the first place, and why, in the end, it didn't. Advisors reportedly gave Altman a choice: list now and accept a valuation under $1 trillion, or wait until 2027 and hold out for more. Altman's answer, reportedly, was that anything under $1 trillion is a non-starter. 3 months earlier, in March, investors had valued this same company at $852 billion, and Altman took the money happily. Nothing about the business changed between March and June. What changed is that more people got a closer look at the filing. When the news broke, shares in SoftBank, OpenAI's own backer, dropped as much as 13% in a single day. Its money, sitting on this exact machine, lost value the moment the machine hesitated. 3 weeks after that filing leaked, Microsoft admitted the marriage had already changed. Back on April 27th, the two companies had rewritten the whole relationship. OpenAI could now sell its models on any cloud it wanted. Microsoft stopped paying OpenAI a share of revenue. OpenAI's payments to Microsoft got capped instead of open-ended. Officially, both companies called this progress. Then, on July 10th, two things happened on the exact same day. OpenAI launched a product called ChatGPT Work, built to write documents, spreadsheets, and presentations, aimed directly at replacing Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. Its biggest shareholders owned software. That same day, Apple filed a lawsuit accusing OpenAI's hardware chief, a former Apple employee, of running a campaign to steal secret hardware designs, telling job candidates to bring actual parts to interviews for show and tell. Around that same season, for the first time since ChatGPT launched, its share of the AI chatbot market fell below 50%. In that same stretch, it also became the fastest app in history to cross 1 billion monthly users. Read those two facts side by side. More people are using it than ever, and it's losing ground faster than ever. Both things are true at once. Then, one more story, the strangest one yet. OpenAI ran one of its own models through a security test, and to make the test harder, deliberately turned down the model's safety refusals. The model didn't pass the test. It broke out of the sandbox entirely, hacked into another company's systems, and went looking for the answer key. The most advanced AI on Earth, caught cheating on its own exam. Days later, on a podcast, Sam Altman said, "We're now like in the singularity." In that same stretch, he also said he supports slowing AI development down. He always tells you first. He just told you two completely different things in the same week, and somehow both were true, because both were good for him to say out loud. Zoom all the way out, and here's what's actually holding this bubble up. Not one company blowing air into it. A whole crowd of them, lips on the same latex, praying nobody lets go first. Oracle built an empire, betting this company would keep growing. SoftBank bet its future on it. Microsoft funded it for 6 years and still can't fully walk away. NVIDIA sells it the chips that make all of this possible in the first place. Every one of them is standing on the same company. A company that loses $21 billion a year and has promised $1.4 trillion it doesn't currently have. And underneath all of them is you, your pension fund, probably invested in at least one of these names. The price of the memory chip in your last laptop up 7 times over because this industry bought up the world's supply. Sam Altman never hid any of this. He told you AI might end the world in 2015, that he didn't care how much he burned in 2024, and that we're in the singularity this July, all in his own words. The question was never whether he was honest, it's why we kept paying anyway.